Thank you very much, Will, and thank you to everyone joining us today. First of all, I want to welcome you all to this session on data science for science. I have with me three outstanding speakers that will be speaking to us about how data science methods are critical to science in unearthing new scientific discovery. I have Hugh Williamson, Research Fellow at the University of Exeter, Adrian Bevan, Director of Particle Physics, Research Center at Queen Mary University, London, Ella Gale, Postdoctoral Research Associate at the University of Bristol. Before giving the floor to the speakers, allow me to underscore a few things about this session as it relates to our activities at the Turing. The core focus of the Data Science for Science program at the Turing is to deliver AI and data science into national labs and research institutes across the UK. Our goal is to offer novel solutions to methodological challenges relevant to multiple scientific fields and engineer new scientific discovery through applied AI and data science. We recognize that scientists need to employ sophisticated AI and data science methods to extract sensitive signals and patterns from their vast quantities of scientific data if they hope to maximize experimental outputs. So to help them achieve this, we deliver efficient data science, promote what AI can offer, build capability, and bring about new science. Our research is carried out through sustained collaboration with partners and research labs nationally and globally in astronomy, molecular biology, environmental science, drug discovery, particle physics, ecosystem monitoring, food security, as well as other areas. We're excited about this session as it furthers our objectives. Without much ado, allow me to introduce you to our first speaker, Adrian Bevan. Fundamental particles and the technology required to further that understanding, both in terms of techniques and algorithms and in terms of instrumentation. Please join me in welcoming Adrian for his presentation entitled Using Large Data Sets in the Unknown. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to be here talking to everyone at CogX. It's a great opportunity. So I should be sharing my screen, which hopefully you can see now. So I'll try and talk to you from the perspective of being a particle physicist, but everything that I'm saying really can be attributed to other aspects of physics. And I'm picking particle physics because it highlights a few extreme situations that one can encounter. So the scale of big science projects continues to increase with time. And to give you some sense of scale here, modern particle physics experiments at colliders, like the European Centre for Nuclear Research, CERN, in Switzerland, are up to 7 stories tall. So 44 meters long, 33 meters high is the Atlas experiment. And there's a graphic illustration of that on the right-hand side of my slide here. And there is a vast number of channels for sensitive electronic instruments that are read out in order to learn what happens in particle collisions that we want to study. And we take these pictures every 25 nanoseconds. So that means 40 million pictures of the detector are taken every second. And to try and convey what this process really means to the non-particle physics audience, we should have a video that I hope will be something that we can get up on screen and play now. And I'll just talk you through what we're seeing here. So this video comes from CERN, and it illustrates the process of how we do a particle physics collider measurement at the Large Hadron Collider. So CERN, for those of you who don't know, is based on the outskirts of Geneva in Switzerland. And the big ring there you see highlighted on the screen is about 27 kilometers in circumference. We start off with hydrogen, molecular hydrogen, and we split the hydrogen atoms apart from each other. and we strip off the electrons to leave behind the hydrogen nuclei, which are protons. And a large part of being able to do physics at the Large Hadron Collider is taking these protons and accelerating them in bunches around successive sections of accelerator instrumentation. And this is accelerating the bunches of protons up to around about the speed of light. Not quite the speed of light because they're massive particles. And it goes through various stages. The superproton synchrotron we see there is the final stage before injection into the Large Hadron Collider. And bunches of protons are injected into the Large Hadron Collider in opposite directions around the ring. And so in this blue tube, we have beams of protons going in opposite directions down two sides of a beam pipe. And they're brought together at various points in order to collide them. And we'll see a picture of a collision shortly, which is an explosion that allows us to probe the fundamental behavior of the constituents of the proton. So the gluons that bind the quarks together in the proton. And really what we need is a lot of technology to be able to get to the position of making the collisions. And we need the instrumentation around that. And machine learning can be used for systems control, for accelerator monitoring, for example. And if you search on Inspire, which is a catalog and search engine that we use for scientific papers in particle physics, you'll see papers with the title of Machine Learning, where the PDF file is uploaded. Points back to about 1989, where there was some initial work on using neural nets and machine learning for beam position monitors. And there's an illustration of this here in the video. So what's a beam position monitor or a beam monitor? Is essentially we need to measure the positions of where the bunches of protons are going so the accelerator physicists can steer them. And they bring them to collide in the center of the detector. Stuff happens, and we get charged particles and neutral particles going through the detector and interacting. The analog signals that are created by those particle interactions with the sensitive parts of our detectors are then digitized and fed off. Now, we can't record everything in those 25 nanosecond time windows for all of those 40 million pictures a second. We have to start thinking about how we can logically throw away stuff that's not interesting so that we can afford to then store stuff on disk and reconstruct pictures like the one we just saw there, distribute the data around the world so that people like myself and PhD students, postdocs in my group, can sit down and analyze the data to try and search for new types of particle. And so that's the end of the video clip. Hopefully now you have a better idea of what I'm saying when I say I'm a particle physicist. There's a huge array of things that need to be done. Now, because we're taking pictures every 25 nanoseconds, we're going to generate large amounts of data. And the scale of the facilities is enormous. The experiment design and construction can take decades. The operational lifetime runs over decades. And so this is, or it can be for some people, a once in a lifetime experiment. It can span their entire working careers. The initial goals that are laid down for us to pursue, for example, the discovery of the Higgs boson at the Large Hadron Collider, once they're surpassed, are replaced by deeper goals, understanding what the Higgs boson really is and how it affects nature, how it fits in. There will be unrelated, novel questions that are posed by theorists over time. And so we have to be agile to adapt. And the data samples have grown from tens of terabytes in the late 90s up to what we expect to be the exabyte scale, so 1 million terabytes by the mid-2020s. This is not just a problem for particle physics. These kind of scales in science also appear in astronomy, for example. And we have roadmaps, how we foresee the computing paradigms evolving and the machine learning use evolving over time. But the thing that is clear is that our existing paradigm for working does not scale. We cannot afford, and we should not be pursuing expanding in a brute force way. And we need to be creative in finding a solution. And here we're really interested in understanding how machine learning can help. And it can help in multiple ways. And I just highlighted a few possible innovations that are being pursued at the moment. One is in event selection. So we can develop an understanding of how to incorporate real-time intelligent analysis of data to decide whether we want to record stuff or throw it away. And we can do this using FPGAs in very, very fast turnaround, so low latency, about 100 nanosecond latency. Event reconstruction, we can use machine learning to reconstruct objects that feed into the end of chain analysis. And deep learning is already starting to make an impact here in a number of different scenarios. And the end of chain analysis, that's where we want to identify that sort of 1 in a billion example of interest to then statistically analyze. For all but the simplest problems, we'll need to employ machine learning in order to help us make accurate and reliable predictions. Here's an example of using FPGAs to enhance the capability of data science. Since this is an ongoing R&D project where FPGA hardware is being looked at from the perspective of implementing deep networks and implementing decision trees in order to make fast decisions with sub-100 nanosecond latency on those decisions. And the really nice thing about this with this group, HLS 4ML, there are other people doing this kind of work as well, is that they're able to learn models using TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, are standard toolkits in the community, scikit-learn, XGBoost, and TMVA, TMVA being a particle physics written open source toolkit, and translate the models that have been learned into lookup tables that can be implemented on the FPGA so that we can actually take advantage of machine learning in these systems without having to learn how to program the HDL, having to program the FPGAs directly. And so that has huge potential for the coming decade. In terms of object reconstruction, event reconstruction, we can look at ways of trying to use deep learning to replace human effort for discovery science. This particular example is people in my group work on. So Lewis Muirhead is the PhD student who's leading really the day-to-day effort on this one. And the plot on the top right shows a nuclear track detector. So this nuclear track detector is just plastic. When a charged particle goes through the plastic, it breaks the chemical bonds, the hydrocarbon bonds, and we chemically etch the plastic in order to amplify the damage created by the particles. So the nanoscopic damage becomes microscopic damage, and we end up with 20 to 30 micron holes going through if there is a large enough deposition of energy. So we end up with surface defects with pits that we're not interested in and through-going holes that we are interested in. So we're currently using machine learning methods to try and automate the way that we classify the through-going holes and the surface pits. Now this is an image of about 2 square millimeters of plastic. We have about 240 square millimeters of plastic. Historically, postdocs have scanned these with stereo microscopes. And what we're looking to do is to take this proof of concept demonstration and to scale it up for an experiment at the Large Hadron Collider. And essentially what we're looking for is holes that correspond to the equivalent of 1/5 the size of a football pitch on the surface of the Earth if you scale up the size of the hole to the 240 square meters of plastic that we're studying. In terms of end of chain, the kind of thing that we're aiming to do here is to take an input feature space and to learn some model that separates signal, the examples we're interested in, from background stuff that is well known and we don't really want to study for our analysis, so that we can take that signal, we can enhance it, either take a measurement of how strong that signal is, or we can do some interesting things with it. And so the example in the middle shows the output of a neural network. And this output of a neural network is used as a one-dimensional input into a 10-dimensional unbinned extended maximum likelihood fit, so that in this particular case, we can study differences between matter and antimatter in some subatomic system, so that we can try and learn a little bit more about why we live in a matter-dominated universe. On the right-hand side is the output of a BDT, which is in a binned form. And this is used to search for the possible production of Higgs bosons. So these are the kinds of challenges we're trying to solve, the kinds of problems we're trying to solve. So when we move away from the scientific challenges and we think more broadly about the technical challenges involved, what is the best algorithm to use for the problem? It seems that as months go by, there are new models out there. How do we decide which algorithm is the best for a given problem? How do we balance what we would traditionally be thinking about, Occam's razor, using simplicity and elegance to choose how we analyze the data, versus the performance for these different machine learning models? That's not trivial, and it's not really addressed in the machine learning literature, how we go about that. So that's the challenge we face. How reproducible is the result? We need to know whether the results are going to be biased or whether there's a large variance in the predictions of the models, because that will affect how we can perform our physical measurements. And is the model overtrained? You know, overtraining will affect, if nothing else, it will affect the discovery potential. And if we use an overtrained model and we miss a discovery, it could be another lifetime before we're in a position to make a repeat of that measurement and learn that error. And ultimately, we also need to understand what the model is really doing. So even with all of those challenges, we're left with a huge missing piece of the puzzle. Most universities in the UK currently don't teach machine learning formally to students at any real level. And globally, there are some universities that have adopted the goal of making sure that every student takes the data science module as a part of their degree. And I think that's a great innovation for the future. We really need to change the way that we educate students in order to be doing better science in the future, because those students will turn into the PhD students, the postdocs, and the academics, as well as going on into industry and other areas of life. And so data science, I believe, needs to be part of the curriculum for school, undergraduate, and graduate students, and that's just a precursor to it becoming essentially education in data science becoming a part of human rights and a part of the basic education that we would expect under that remit. So that presents another huge problem, a barrier to using ML in physics. Quality training for a rapidly developing subject that's not core to the discipline is a real challenge, and it requires multidisciplinary working. There's lots of information on the web out there about machine learning. Not all of it's reliable or useful. A couple of examples: Turing have developed the Turing Way, which is a great handbook for reproducible data science, and there's a link on this page if you're interested in that. There are companies out there who are developing training courses in this space. So LearnTech.io is one that we've worked with in the past on the development of the AI Demystified training course, and some of the students from my department have worked with that company to develop parts of that package. And that really was focused at trying to understand the issues about learning AI in a non-computer science environment to be able to support people self-educating. And aside from the academic aspect, we've got to remember that we can't leave the wider population behind, and that means the more senior staff as well as more junior people who just haven't had the opportunity to do data science at all. So this is just an example of the kinds of thing that the AI Demystified program includes. And here we're just looking at an MNIST example being processed by a neural network and talking through really the logic of that. So just to summarize, machine learning has been used for decades in physics. In the past 10 years, we've seen a significant increase in the use of machine learning. And in the next 10 years, I think what we're going to see really is the need for a deeper education of physicists in data science and ML in general, the more widespread use of all types of machine learning. And as we're doing this, we also have a chance of stepping up to the challenge of helping developing countries participate in research in big science projects where we provide open data. And that has really the altruistic aim of trying to help those countries upskill their local communities so they become more competitive economically, and in the long run that it avoids placing a barrier in disenfranchising parts of the world as the developed world who has data science skills run away from those people who are less affluent. We also need to develop a deeper understanding of algorithm predictions in the context of discovery and doing science. And that's non-trivial. One interesting aspect that really is critical for us here, I think, is explainability and interpretability of models. If we don't understand what the model is doing when it's making a prediction, why it's making that prediction, when it makes the wrong prediction, how do we feed that information back into the way we design our experiments? And so that's we do have a Slido poll to provoke a few questions that may help with the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian, for that informative and interesting talk. It seems we have a questions for you right now. Before I call on Ella to come on, there is a question It goes thus. With regards to the best algorithm, is the Turing Institute working with any NAS methods to help with the search?
I'm not fully up to date with the recent events with COVID. I've been a bit distracted, so I'm not fully up to date whether people are working in this area broadly within the Turing. But it is something we're interested in.
Okay, thank you. Can I then pass the stage to Gale, a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Bristol? She will be talking to us on the topic, bridging the data gap, bringing machine learning to synthetic chemistry. Over to you, Ella.
Hello. Hi. My name is Ella Gale, and I work for the Technology Enhanced Chemical Synthesis CDT at the University of Bristol. And I'm here to talk about the application of new technologies to synthetic chemistry. Okay, so what is synthetic chemistry? Well, all of you will have eaten, swallowed, used, or worn something made by synthetic chemistry this morning. The output of this industry is chemicals. And by chemicals, I mean chocolate, I mean shampoo, I mean fertilizer, medicines, lipstick, plastic, mobile phones, pretty much everything in our modern world. Together, this generates $5.7 trillion a year and employs over 1 million people. And that just includes those involved in the making of things, not the selling or prescribing. So synthetic chemistry is literally the creation of the stuff of modern life. Synthetic chemistry research is the making of new, never before made chemicals. And here I outline the pipeline of synthetic chemistry research. In the pipeline, we take things in, we do something with them, we analyze them, and then we output them. And hopefully we make something new and interesting. Our inputs are chemicals and chemical knowledge. The process is carried out by researchers, such as this guy here, who go into the lab to make, i.e. synthesize, new chemicals. Then we analyze what we have made to answer the question, did we make what we expected to make? And we use a technology called spectroscopy to answer that question. Finally, our outputs are chemicals and new knowledge which we feed back into the process in order to continue on it. So when we're making a new chemical, we may loop around this process several times. Okay, chemical space is the space of all the possible molecules that could possibly be made. In this talk, I will concentrate on pharmacological molecules, although everything I say also applies to agrochemicals and material science. Concentrating on just potential drug-like molecules, there are billions and billions and billions of them, enough so that we cannot synthesize them, even if we had the entire lifetime of the universe to do so. By 2009, we had made 49 million of them. But this is only a tiny, tiny, minuscule percentage of all the possible molecules that we could make. So this number here is missing about 40 zeros. Now, each of these undiscovered drug-like molecules could be the perfect treatment or cure for anything that ails us. We just need to find them. As one of the biggest of big data problems in the field, we can look at machine learning and artificial intelligence to help us out. After all, artificial intelligence and machine learning has been transformative for many fields. Why not synthetic chemistry? So, where might we apply machine learning to synthetic chemistry? Well, we can look for new drug targets by exploring that chemical space I mentioned earlier and targeting molecules or groups of molecules for a specific ailment. Machine learning could then suggest methods to synthesize a chemical, perhaps tuning the synthesis to favor cost, speed, or to avoid environmentally toxic chemicals. Machine learning can predict the spectra of the correct molecule, a key step to determining what we have made. And it could possibly predict the outcome of reactions, which can help guide the choices of what synthesis to try in the lab. But there is a problem. Synthetic chemistry suffers from a data gap. As a synthetic chemist, you'll traditionally work on something similar to what everyone else in your group is doing. And you go into the lab with your lab book and try and make your target chemical, write down what happens, then go and do spectroscopy, stick the spectra in your lab book, and if you've made what you want, you publish. If not, you try something else. And even if you do publish, you'll likely only publish the bits of the data relevant to what you wanted the chemical for. This works fine for traditional synthetic chemistry, but machine learning requires a lot of additional data covering most of the space you want to explore. It needs negative examples, and it requires that the data is in a consistent and machine-readable format. But we have a lack of data as we've not explored much of that chemical space. And we have a problem of what I like to call the dark matter of synthetic chemistry, which is all those failed or underwhelming reactions that are never published. And we have all that data locked up in lab books, PhD theses, papers, etc. So over the next 10 years, I believe that machine learning and AI will be applied ever more to chemistry and will be transformative, but only if we can get more higher quality data. So I return to the synthetic chemistry pipeline I showed earlier and discuss where the problems lie in each step and what recent projects and publications have arisen to address them. This work is all very new and the areas are quite niche at the moment, but I believe that these areas will all grow in importance in the next decade and beyond. First, one of our inputs was the chemicals. We need to get them into a machine-readable format, and there are questions on how best to do this. What actually is important about the molecule? Is it its formula, its structure, perhaps its behavior, or maybe its three-dimensional shape? And there are similar questions about the representation of reactions. Our next input is knowledge. Modern chemistry has been around for over 200 years and has discovered much. But a lot of chemical knowledge is locked up in journals and PhD theses and patents and professors, and is only accessible to humans with access to the correct library or laboratory. So work in this area involves extracting and normalizing this data using semantic web tools tuned for chemistry terms, data mining, and expert systems. Now, before going to the lab, we need to choose what chemical we want to make. We often know roughly what sort of shape and type of molecule we want to create to do a task. And this example shows how we get that information. So, in this example, we want to find a drug to disrupt the life cycle of the influenza virus and destroy it. So we look for part of the virus to attack. Now, this protein here on the left is responsible for a virus entering and leaving the host cell. So disrupting this process prevents the virus from replication and can treat the infection. Now here we see a student from Bristol docking an antiviral drug, this is Tamiflu, into what is called the active site of the protein, that's this bit here. Now a molecule that bounces back out or does not fit will not be useful, and the difference between the two can be a single atom. Traditionally, we would come up with a number of potential candidates and then run complex simulations to determine how they would interact. And this is very expensive and time-consuming. But human beings are great at seeing where things can fit together like a puzzle, and we are excellent at manipulating 3D objects with our hands. So VR is an excellent way to interact with the simulation. So you can see here that the student pulls part of the protein over the active site to hold the drug in. This is what would happen in the cell and allows her to reject or accept a candidate molecule far quicker than a machine would. And currently we're working on COVID, obviously, to try and help with that drug discovery in that area. So using VR in this way will generate new data and will help chemists touch and interact molecules. And I think this will be important over the next 10 years. Now onto the processes. Once you know what you're going to make, you go into the lab to run reaction, and there's data we can gather there. When doing synthetic chemistry, you are usually using both your hands. You're manipulating things. So projects like Talk to Lab that allows you to ask questions or record observations verbally are useful. Then there is the data from readings during the actual experiment. One approach is to use smart glassware, which has sensors in it to record what happens. This is great, but does require the glassware you need to be available. Another approach is one that this recent paper took, which is to use neural networks, a type of machine learning algorithm, and use them what they are good for, which is image recognition, and apply it to the chemistry relevant problem of identifying which part of an image is liquid and solid. Now, I've done syntheses in a lab where a single step took 12 hours. And obviously you do not want to be in the lab for all that time. So also with the coronavirus crisis, Bristol's research labs are only operating at a 33% occupancy at the moment. So you can imagine that this sort of algorithm attached to a webcam could be very useful to alert the researcher when the reaction finishes, reducing the occupancy of the lab and wasted time. Now, when you go into your lab, you take your lab book. Lab books are actually a legal document and can be used in patent disputes, so every scientist keeps one. They look like this, and this is still common in labs today. And you can see from this, you have This one's a bit of a mess, which is also standard. You have different types of information here. You have molecules, you have reactions, and over here you have spectra that have been cut out and stuck in for your analysis. So electronic lab books aim to capture this data, which is difficult as there are several types of data, and we have the problems I outlined in the first slide to do with inputted chemicals. And if you scan a paper lab book, you need chemically aware OCR for this as well. And there is much work on an open format for capturing this data and a machine readable format to allow for exchange between people as well. Or you can automate your entire synthesis and capture the data automatically. These are two automated synthesis robots that can do your synthesis for you. As everything is controlled by a computer, all the details of your experiments are recorded. And I'm currently involved in a project to create an open procedure for data capture from these machines in a format ready for machine learning and data mining. And as every data scientist knows, building your data pipeline is a crucial part of the process. Not strictly to do with machine learning or data science specifically, but design of experiments will be one of the big things in this industry over the next 10 years. For those of you with a tech or marketing background, design of experiments is very similar to A/B testing with many factors, so ABCD testing. Normally, synthetic chemists changed one thing at a time. Design of experiments uses statistics to set up experiments that change several things at a time. As this graphic shows, this goes really well with automated synthesis, as you can do all the experiments concurrently. Traditionally, doing one reaction at a time, this reaction would take 2 days. Using design of experiments and automation, the students were able to get results from 22 different reactions, tuning 5 variables over that same time. Now, this allows a quicker exploration of chemical space, faster optimization of reactions, and generates a better quality spread of the data. Okay, none of these technologies matter if you do not have researcher engagement. The researcher is the most important part of the process. Synthetic chemists are historically not highly trained in computing subjects. For that reason, the Technology Enhanced Chemical Synthesis CDT trains students in the following subjects: statistics, which is not typically part of a chemistry undergraduate degree, coding, which they tend not to have done at all, data science, regression models, machine learning, design of experiments, which I've already talked about, automated synthesis, as you see here, virtual reality, and flow chemistry. Now, the point of this is not to create data scientists, but enable them to work with the data scientists, be able to capture data, understand why it's important, and to improve the analysis of data in the field. Okay, now the analysis part. Analysis is slightly different. Once you've made what you hope is the correct chemical, you go and do spectroscopy to find out what you have made. Nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy is a commonly used technique for this. If you've heard of MRI, this is MRI for molecules. You get an NMR spectra of your molecule and you compare it to a predicted NMR spectra to see if you've made the correct thing or something else. Now, this requires difficult mathematics, quantum mechanics specifically, and can take around 2 days to do. And if you haven't made what you've intended, you may need to run another simulation for 2 days to find out what you might have made. This is very frustrating if you've just made something you're very excited about it and you want to know what it is. This program here, Impression, is a machine learning algorithm that gives you the approximate answer in 5 minutes rather than 2 days. And this really highlights the usefulness of machine learning to this area of chemistry. However, we can do better still. Here, the same group wanted to improve NMR prediction. So they set up a Kaggle competition, which crowdsources ML to interesting problems. Sorry.
Thank you,
So
Ella.
in this instance, for only 30 grand, which is around 6 months of a PhD student's time, this group managed to get 47,000 models
Sorry,
from
Ella.
almost 3,000 groups.
Can I interrupt you
Sorry.
for a moment, please? We are running out of time. It would be good if you can quickly conclude your talk.
Okay, thank you. This is my final slide. So for the next 10 years, we will capture more data, more types of data, better quality data. There will be more automation, which will give more data. And those automated synthesis robots are only going to increase in number in the next 10 years. This will lead to the application of AI in a better way. And this will give us more chemical knowledge, which will give us the medicines, the vaccines, the materials, and the goods that humanity will need for the next 100 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that amazing talk. Our next speaker is Hugh Williamson, a research fellow in the Center for the Study of Life Science at the University of Exeter. His talk is entitled, "What Data Landscape Do We Need for Plant and Agricultural AI?" Without further ado, over to you, Hugh.
Great, thanks, Adeniyi. I'll move straight on so we can keep to time. So what I'm going to talk about here is the kind of data landscape that we need for plant and agricultural AI. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So to give some context on the broader landscape of plant science that now stands, it's really characterized by having many different cultures of data production and also data exchange. Classically in science, a lot of data is produced in labs, but plant science and its agricultural applications are particularly moved out into what we might call hybrid spaces. So spaces somewhere between the lab and the field, experimental field stations, farm platforms, smart glass houses that capture both features of the plants themselves, but also the environment using a lot of new sensing technologies. It's also marked by the integration of agronomic research, which is very much about evaluating the performance of crops in the field, with more fundamental plant science and omics data, so genomics, metabolomics, proteomics at a molecular level, and trying to bring those together to understand molecular mechanisms and their expression in the phenotype of the plants, it's known. There's also a strong open data legacy in plant research, from corn researchers in the early 20th century through to research on the model organism Arabidopsis thaliana more recently. And that's something that's also come into contact with more recent pushes for principles such as FAIR data and the CARE principles, which are about community data sovereignty and indigenous data sovereignty. So we could move forward again, please. And the other aspect of plant science at the moment is really driven by a quest for food security under conditions of climate change, and now also in relation to the COVID crisis and the various effects that that's had on food supply chains. This includes an increased focus on crops from the global south, which are maybe less important in the overall food supply chains in a commercial sense, but are very important as staple crops for smallholder farmers, so cassava, various types of banana beyond the familiar yellow Cavendish. And these are really building on the legacy of heritage food crops held in local communities, and with the aim of understanding the much wider set of crop varieties which are necessary for developing new crops in response to climate change and changing environments. So we can move on again. So what are the opportunities for data science and AI in agriculture and the various plant science applications that come into this? There are quite a lot of options here. I mean, prediction is a very significant area. This can be used, for example, in soil health, using handheld spectroscopy tools to allow us to predict things that would usually need to be done through wet lab chemistry, and also various kinds of crop modeling to understand how crops are likely, particular varieties of crops are likely to grow in a given environment. Another nice example is to monitor the spread of crop pests. So there's some work being done to train machine learning models with bioacoustic data from insects so that the model can then recognize individual species, and that could be useful for recording sonic data in fields and then identifying what insect pests are present. Disease detection and stress evaluation are also very big areas, using computer vision to detect and in some cases diagnose particular diseases from images of plant leaves primarily. Again, a nice example of this, the Plant Village Nuru app, which is a smartphone app that can be used in field without an internet connection to diagnose the particular disease is for cassava, and that's been developed specifically to help smallholder farmers in Africa who might not have access to information about these kind of diseases. So if we move on to the next slide. So what I want to focus on here is less about these particular tools and applications than a couple of elements about how we get to the point of being able to implement AI and advanced data science in the agricultural field. And there are two areas really here. The first one is to think about the central role that data acquisition and curation plays. The data that we get in agriculture comes from very, very different sources. It's climate data, it's soil data, it's plant data, it's molecular data, and also includes a mix of quantitative and observational, often very descriptive data with imaging, kind of RGB, hyperspectral imaging, and also video as well. And it's also necessary to compare and integrate data from across the globe, because agriculture is an area that is fundamentally dependent on diversity and the variety of crops that have grown around the world in many, many different environments. And as environments continue to change, we need to understand how those different varieties of crops can be moved around, what we know about their genetics and the effects of this can be harnessed to help us respond to changing climate and other issues in the global food supply chains. And also, more broadly, AI applications are dependent on machine-readable and high-quality reference data, as some of the other speakers have referred to, and I'll discuss that a little bit more. And also, I want to focus on the necessity of developing global data infrastructures that can really bring together all the resources that are needed to properly make use of the data that we already have. So if we move to the next slide. So how do we make plant data amenable to AI? There are several challenges to making it machine readable and interoperable in the first instance. These are epistemic, so kind of philosophical about the status of data as evidence, and they're technical, but they're also social, and we shouldn't forget that fact. There are three examples here of key areas. One is labeling. If we want data to be usable in large-scale computational analysis, we need appropriate labels for the data that can be understood in semantic terms. And what this needs is common trait descriptors, but this is something that can often be very difficult when you're trying to bring together people from different areas of plant science, so plant pathology, genetics, sections of plants, kind of parts of the plant that may seem very similar to us might be given completely different names in these different areas, and we need to find ways to harmonize the different terminologies and descriptors that are used. Secondly, we need metadata that can properly contextualize this data, particularly when we're drawing on data from many different phenomena, so gene-environment interactions, ecology, pathogens, biodiversity. We need to understand where that data has come from, how it's been produced, and whether it can properly be integrated with other data sources. And then finally, there's a need for agreements among stakeholders about data sharing, because there's a massive quantity of data being produced from many different sources, both publicly funded research institutes, but also large agricultural corporations. And it's really in the benefit of everyone to be able to get access to this data and work together to improve the food supply chains. But actually negotiating these agreements and responding to the various needs of stakeholders is a very difficult task. Next slide. So the main obstacles in this case are the lack of a clear regulatory framework for data work. There has been quite a lot of increase in regulation around the movement of biological materials, so seeds in the first instance, but not only seeds, and how that can properly be passed between countries and between research institutes, what kind of intellectual property rights there are. But the same kind of attention has not yet been given to the data produced from research on these materials. And this leaves a very unclear relation between the germplasm, the seeds that we get from farmers, breeders, and small researchers, and the digital data that gets produced from these, if there is intellectual property protections on, or there is ownership over a particular variety of a plant, and then data is produced about it. where do we stand in terms of that data? The data itself might not be protected, so it may be used and shared much more widely, which can have issues both in terms of property rights by corporations, but also in terms of providing benefits back to the communities from where these are developed.
Hugh, I'm sorry to rush you. You're already going quite quickly, but we are running short of time. So if you could try and wrap up in the next couple of minutes, that would be really helpful.
Okay, well, let's skip forward one then. So there we go. One of the very important sites that we have for trying to develop responses to this issue surrounding the data landscape is the importance of data infrastructures, which, as you can see some on the side here, we've got the CGIAR, Large Agricultural Research Network, we have GODAN. And the way these are set up are very much as international bodies to sidestep national borders, which have become a quite difficult area in plant science and other biological sciences due to restrictions placed on the flow of genetic resources. And also, what's key about these organizations is that they've been assembling multidisciplinary, multi-stakeholder teams from around the world, so bringing together lots of different people with different expertise to help kind of produce solutions that will work for as many people as possible. And this is really based on what we might call an epistemic economy, the set of ideas about knowledge that on the one hand presents global plant knowledge as a common good to be harnessed, and secondly positions open data as necessary for such knowledge production. So if we could skip to the next slide and then one more, I think. Yeah, so one of the key aspects of our research at Exeter has really been to look at the extent to which data stewardship is necessary to foster critical data reuse. And what do I mean by critical data reuse? I mean finding ways to reuse data that takes into account its limits and its opportunities, bearing in mind where it's come from, what it was originally used for, but also is aware of some of the more social implications of data and the impacts it can have for sharing resources. And I think if we skip forward one more, again, it's the communities of practice. Oh, can we go back one? Sorry. The communities of practice are the areas where this has really been happening and where you get the best coordination among international practitioners. So the CGIAR community on agrosemantics and ontologies is one example where you've got a lot of people working in different areas of plant science coming together to try and produce comprehensive and coherent sets of labeling, as I mentioned earlier. And they've been very effective at getting people from many different areas, for example, work on different crop species and building them up into a much larger group who can create an ontology that also works with other ontologies, such as the plant experimental conditions. We skip forward one more and I'll wrap up within the next minute. So data curation is really the key role here. We focus a lot on the scientists who produce data, but it's really this new role of the data curator, who is a person who has the time and the resources to actually manage data and check where it's come from, add the necessary metadata, and really make sure it's available for the most people as possible. And this role is still quite a niche area, but it's essential for developing these landscapes of data and the infrastructures that will eventually allow us to take advantage of these new AI and machine learning tools. So I will, if we skip forward just one more, and this is the project that we've been working on, the Turing Institute, and I'd like to say thanks to various people, but I will hold it there because we are very much out of time and I'm very aware of that.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.